Lots of political questions spin out of this as the Trudeau government continues to promise to pull Canada's fighter jets out of the mission in spite of their role in this most recent fight, and to expand the training mission on the ground. But what will that look like and how will they do it? Our MPs are here to debate all of this. Randall Garrison, the defense critic for the NDP, is in Victoria. James Bezan, defense critic for the official opposition, joins us from Winnipeg. And John McKay, the parliamentary secretary for defense representing the government, is here from Toronto. Let's start with reaction to the latest fight. Canadian troops involved. This was self-defense. Your thoughts, first of all, Randall, on this. Do you think that they were doing the right thing? Do you agree with this mission?
Well, I have the greatest respect for the ability of the Canadian forces, and I know we're all glad to hear that there are no casualties on our side, and of course our thoughts go out to the losses among our allies. But it really raises the question of what is the proper role for Canada in the fight against ISIS. And we've said all along that the government needs to make clear what they're intending to do. They promised to end the bombing mission, and now we're hearing maybe they're going to extend it. They've been talking about expanding a training mission, but what we've seen in the events yesterday was that the training mandate is to train, advise, and assist. So it's more than just training, and that leads to the danger that Canadian forces will be in the direct line of fire, as happened yesterday.
And is that advise and assist that many think is essential to the mission, James? But the reality is that it does also mean that sometimes troops will have to fire back in self-defense. Your take on the news that we had, that the Canadian forces were involved in using their weapons on the ground in terms of self-defense, and also those CF-18s from the sky?
Well, I want to first of all salute the brave men and women of the Canadian Armed Forces, especially the Special Operation Forces and our CF-18 pilots, who conducted themselves so admirably yesterday and really did stand shoulder to shoulder with our coalition partners in helping the Kurdish Peshmerga repel this attack. You know, this again speaks to the larger narrative that we're playing a significant role, both in the air combat mission and in the advise and assist mission that the Special Operation Forces are doing with the Kurdish Peshmerga. Iraqi security forces need that capability, having the experience that we bring with the Canadian Armed Forces in happening with not just training, but also making sure that they're engaging the battle properly. And keep in mind that, you know, the Kurdish Peshmerga are a militia unit. These are civilians who have been forced into the armed combat role because of ISIS and their genocidal nature. And yesterday, ISIS again demonstrated that they're not ready to quit. That they want to not only protect Mosul, but also we're pushing towards Erbil, and we can't let that happen. And that's why it's so critical that we keep the CF-18s in combat to provide that air support to the ground mission that the Kurdish Peshmerga, the Iraqi security forces, the Canadian Special Operation Forces are engaged in to stop ISIS from spreading their hatred, their terrorism, and committing atrocities.
John, I want to ask you, what is the logic behind pulling the CF-18s? We're hearing that they were able to support what was happening on the ground. Why? Why is it necessary to pull the fighter jets out?
Well, first of all, I want to acknowledge the quality of the support that we have been providing on the ground to the Peshmerga, and in some ironical way, it speaks to the nature in which the government, the direction in which the government wants to go, which is a training mission, which is in some respects unique to the Canadian forces. We have been exemplary in Afghanistan in training Afghan forces, and I expect that this will continue. So, ironically, one of the reasons that we didn't, that the ISIL forces made no progress whatsoever after a 17-hour firefight is in part due to the quality of training that the Peshmerga have received from the Canadians. As to the CF-18s, that's been a long-standing position of our party. It was a long-standing position in the campaign, and it is the intention of the government to reprofile our mission in a way in which we think that we can be most effective.
But what's the logic of that? Why does it have to be an either-or? Why can't you have both?
Well, we made that strategic decision, and we went to the Canadian people with that strategic decision. So it's in some respects, it's an invitation for us to back up on a promise that we've made. We've already talked to all of our allies on this. In fact, the Prime Minister has talked to President Obama 3 or 4 times on this and other matters. There's been a recalibration of that entire relationship between Canada and the U.S. And in many different ways, including the cool decision that was just made, along with a state dinner. So so our allies appear to support our decision to withdraw on the F-18s and to reprofile to a training and humanitarian mission.
Randall, do you support that idea of going to a purely training mission?
Well, what we've said all along is we have to figure out what's most effective at degrading ISIS' ability to mount attacks like this. And clearly the bombing campaign hasn't diminished that. No matter how good the training, and it is good training I know that we provide, they're still able to mount major attacks. And so what's most important, I think, from our point of view, is to cut off the flow of funds. We know that ISIS is earning between $1 and $3 million a day from oil sales. To cut off the flow of arms, particularly small arms, which we have an ability to do, and to cut off the flow of foreign fighters. And those are the things that will actually degrade ISIS' ability. But it would require Canada to take a leadership role on the world stage to focus on those things that would be most effective.
James, this is something, and no one disputes the effectiveness of Canadian Special Operations Forces trainers. They've trained people all over the world. But at the same time, there is a risk element to being on the ground, certainly capable of handling themselves, as we saw yesterday, but the reality is that sometimes what's most effective is also carries an element of risk to it.
Anytime we deploy our troops, they're at risk, and they know that, and that's why they're so well trained and so well equipped. You know, if we look at the Liberals' position on here, it's completely incoherent, and it gets more confusing by the day. It doesn't make any sense to withdraw our CF-18s. We can do both, and we can make a more robust training mission, but we still don't even know what that training mission looks like. We have one set of messaging coming from Minister Sajan that talks about, you know, holding our CF-18s there, maybe even beyond the authorization that Parliament gave till March 2016. And then you also have Minister Dion talking about that, well, we're going to do more diplomatic roles, more training of police, not even talking about special operation forces. So, and he's also talking about pulling the CF-18s a matter of days, not months. So, you know, it's just more confusing, and it also sends all the wrong messages to our allies. You know, the Kurdistan regional government has said that our CF-18s have helped save lives and destroyed the enemy. So it is imperative that we keep the CF-18s there. And ironically, John, the CF-18s demonstrated again why we need them, because when our forces do come under fire, it's nice to be able to call in our own equipment, our own CF-18s through the Royal Canadian Air Force to protect them.
But John, I want to ask you about your government's position on this. You've said that you want to expand the training mission. It would be the same type of training essentially as what we're doing now, advise and assist. Back in January, now Prime Minister Trudeau accused the government of misleading the Canadian people when Canadian Special Operations Forces got into a very similar situation. They were in a firefight. They were firing out of self-defense. You don't seem to be taking it that way now. Isn't that a bit hypocritical?
Well, you'll recollect, Mercedes, that the previous government was not terribly forthcoming with any information about anything at any time. And as a consequence, all opposition parties and indeed the Canadian public were in the dark as to whether this is in fact boots on the ground and a mission creep, hence the suspicion. Contrast that with last night, where all of you as reporters were called to D&D headquarters for an intense briefing about what actually happened in the previous 17 hours. So then Mr. Trudeau, now Prime Minister Trudeau, could be forgiven if there was some suspicion about what the government of Mr. Harper was doing at the time.
Okay, is this just same song, different tune? Go ahead, James.
Well,
it's not completely wrong, James.
And updates No, no. Listen, John. Like we provided technical briefings on a weekly basis on the activities of our Special Operation Forces and our Royal Canadian Air Force combat mission that we are conducting in the war against ISIS throughout the past 12 months. And this is the very first. What we saw last night was the very first technical briefing that's been provided by the new Trudeau government. So they haven't been transparent. We're still waiting for their plan. That they campaigned on making sure that we're going to take out our CF-18s and have a more robust training mission, but we don't know what that looks like. We don't know how many Special Operation Forces they're talking about. We're not sure if that's even what they're doing because, Minister Dion talks about doing more in policing and more in civil society and more democratic institution building. But before you can do that, you actually have to stop ISIS from spreading their terror attacks around the region and around the world.
Okay.
So we have to be there, and we're not seeing any accountability or transparency from the Liberals.
Well, and there's a lot of questions.
Well, as you know,
that still have to be answered
sorry, Mercedes,
on that.
we fought a campaign over this.
Indeed.
With no details.
And
yes.
we still don't have an answer about, do you know? Can you tell us what it's going to look like? Because we would love to know. If maybe
quite
you give
clearly,
us a hint.
Quite clearly, Minister Sagen is deeply engaged with the Allies. Clearly, Prime Minister Trudeau is deeply engaged with the Allies. How that mission shapes and takes place is no one is in a position to disclose, and in fact, to be the height of foolishness to disclose at this point what the plan might be going forward.
Okay.
So until that reaches some point of fruition where it can be shared publicly, it's certainly not going to be, we're certainly not going to end up in some sort of realm of fantasy and speculation.
Well, we have to wrap it up there. I'm sure we'll be keeping a close eye on this, even over the Christmas break. Thank you very much to our MPs for joining us today.
Thank you.
Anytime, Mercedes.